Hi, everyone. I hope I can be heard. So we wanted to give an update on AMP Bento. Justin is somewhere here as well, I believe. Well, I'll start. I just heard him a minute ago. So what is Bento? We want to take AMP components and run them outside of AMP pages. In a hidden use case, we also want to run them better inside of AMP pages, and you kind of will see how it goes. So when we set it, we basically started looking at 3 different modes. AMP mode can run on an AMP page. We have Bento mode, where we take component and run it on a wild page somewhere using plethora of JavaScript frameworks. And actually, specifically, 3P framework mode that allows directly use AMP components. And once we look at this, we said, OK, we can go from 2 directions. We can make from our framework more modular, more configurable, easier to distribute different ways, with version locking, without version locking. And we can do similar things with components. We can make them smaller, more independent, more mutable, easier to distribute. Here's Justin. And we can meet somewhere happily in between. And that way we'll create a more framework. This is Justin, by the way. This way, we started moving it. What we realized is that it's a very large corpora that we're dealing with, and doing framework level core mutations is expensive. We have to do it with avoiding regressions over time, synchronize ourselves with numerous experiments and different updates. And we will still get a minimal runtime this way that registers components and governs their use little by little. And what we realized that it would be more or less akin, if we do it the wrong way, it will be more or less akin as forking AMP runtime and supporting several versions of it, which is obviously not what we wanted to do. So we kind of reset a little bit and said, what's a minimal API that we need to support for well-behaving video player or carousel to work correctly? And this is what today is talking about. There are actually very few needs that we need to support. We need to have some internal state about the component, has it been loaded, which carousel slide it's on. We need an external context to tell components when they can perform resource-intensive actions. We need a way to render this all in a DOM, and we need to react to components mutations and state changes. And
so we rethought it. What if we just had a single render method? And if we do have a render method, that could be the entire API. If state changes, we just call the render method. If the framework says we can now create network requests, insert an iframe, we just call the render method. If the element is resized or it becomes in viewport, we call the render method. Any of these, just call the render method. This may look familiar to you. If you're familiar with React, we can decide how to, we can put all of the core logic for how a component renders, for this case, an AMP image, in just a single render method. We can put the state into the render method and just return the image that we want to insert. If it's not loadable, we can delete the SRC and the source set, and you don't create a network request. And we can make this extremely complicated if we want to. This is a case for AMP carousel, where we can have internal state for the current slide presentation, the current slide being presented, so that when you click on the next or back buttons, you can go to the appropriate slide, the -1 or the +1. We can control when the images inside of the carousel actually present using the context API. We can, I already talked about the button. We can control the current scroll position of the scroller so that we can present the correct slide. All this just in a single render method. So we decided to switch over to React and then to Preact. The main benefit being it's considerably smaller, from about 40 kilobytes down to 4 for the things that we're using. We can write our component logic all in the single render method, and it contains the core of what's needed. We can, if anything changes about it, if the state changes, if the properties attached to the attribute change, we can just call the render method. It's all contained there. And Preact specifically is fully compatible with React just by using the compat module to support whatever is not in the base module by default. And this works for all of our modes. In AMP framework mode, we can wrap the React components, and the framework can talk directly to the wrapper, and the wrapper will talk to the React component for us. In Bento mode, we can take the same approach, having a simple custom element wrapper, and whenever a mutation happens on that custom element, talk to the React component, and just the wrapper, custom element wrapper, can talk directly to the React component. And then obviously when you're in React or Preact, you have an application built in React or Preact, you can just use the component as is. It is a React component, a Preact component. So we're officially announcing that we're going to start building our components in Preact and have them wrapped so that we can support all of the modes that we have. I think this is your slide.
Sure. I'll grab just Yes, and the idea here is, we put it in 3 columns here, but really they all include each other. So on a React Preact level, if you read from right to left, it takes care of rendering, the pre-render, and re-rendering. It allows us to pass across component context using React context. The same way we can actually deal with loadable, and playable states. And we can also, use some more or less hacky ways or proper ways to export APIs back. Once we go a little bit deeper, we can actually wrap it in a custom element, connect it to custom element upgrade lifecycle, support DOM mutations and DOM component bindings. And our framework essentially will take care of more of a document level concerns. Things like how do we have a document structure laid out so that we don't, it doesn't jump around. How we schedule resources. And schedule resources is all about deciding which component at any particular time wins, because we don't want, we can't load a limited number of them. So again, it's a cross-document concept. Actions frameworks, viewport, document scoping, and embedding all of this at document level concerns, and they naturally will live in a AMP document level framework. And we want to kind of show you what it kind of looks like, and in the end, we'll give you a link to actual prototype where it all works. But first, I think we wanted to say a couple of words about Preact and versus both. And I think Justin already mentioned it.
Yeah. So the Preact compat mode gives us full React compatibility if you want to use that. Like I said, it's already much, much smaller, which means the AMP components can continue to be small, even if you were to include the Preact component in the AMP image JavaScript file. And we don't have to deal with things like the React event system using Preact. Preact just uses the native event that from the DOM. So we don't have to wrap. We don't have any issues with shadow trees or anything else. Next slide. So what does this mean for you as a user of AMP? Well, nothing is really changing. You still can write the same AMP carousel element into your HTML pages, give it the current slide, or even the next button, the custom next button that you want to use. Of course, you have the slides that you're actually presenting. And we can map this over into the Preact world. You're going to be using a AMP carousel component. You can give it the slide, obviously. Give it the arrow next property so that you can have your custom arrows. And then the slides are just the children of the components, and we can present it that way. Next slide. In AMP world, though, this doesn't quite work out for us because we don't have, like, for instance, the button as a JSX node. We don't have the children as a JSX node. These things are live elements already in your DOM tree. But what we can do instead is assign them to slots. If you're familiar with the shadow rendering or the shadow DOM, you can just attach a shadow tree to the AMP carousel and then assign all these, the button that you have for your custom buttons, the children that you have, to individual slots. And then we can create the slot in JSX and pass that to our component. So the AMP carousel would be receiving a slot element that will represent your button, that will represent each of your individual children, so that we can present them in the carousel. Next slide. And this works out really, really well. The shadow tree gives us complete separation so that we're able to present all of the API that we need. We're able to just render the slots wherever we would for our presentation. And we're able to put the individual children into wrappers so that we can apply basic styling to the slides so that they have width and height. They're the correct box. I don't know how to, the CSS box, so that they don't collapse if you're having a float left or something. We can just do this for you by default and put the slot wherever it needs to be. I didn't write this.
I think this will just try to show you when we ran in JSX or React component itself has no idea that it works in Shadow DOM, has no knowledge of this. All it does is what it would normally do in any other case, make it universally usable. It just says, you pass me a property, I'm going to put it here, like arrow next. You pass me a slide, I'm just going to put it somewhere else inside. So you can see there is really no knowledge of anything AMP inside of this renderer.
So we have it available for you. This is a prototype so far. We haven't actually built this into the framework yet, but so far it's working beautifully for us. And you can go and see it right now. We just open sourced this today. It's been a private repo for us so that we can prototype everything. And this is available for you to see what we're going to be building in the future.
Thank you.
We're doing.
We'll wait for questions.
Yeah.
What's your favorite DOM API?
Oh my god.
History.
Might be appropriate. An actual question.
Not really DOM, but.
Will you guys need help rewriting all of the components?
So with this approach, going in the future, yes. Each of the components will have to be rewritten in React or Preact before you'll be able to use it in Bento mode. But this approach allows us to do this piecemeal. We don't have to rewrite every component immediately. It just wouldn't work. So we can transition AMP image, and then we can transition AMP carousel or AMP YouTube or anything individually, and then have them immediately supported in Bento.
Thanks.
I got this one.
Hey, so I assume when a component like AMP image would get rewritten to support Bento mode, that'd be like a major version update. But what's the plan for any type of backwards compatibility with sites that currently use those components?
So V0 itself stays the same. We don't have to change anything about it. The components that we rewrite will have to be a major bump. So right now, AMP image is 0.1. We would have to go to 1.0 or 0.2.
Or not. That's not necessarily, as you saw, like AMP role doesn't necessarily change. If we decide that it's for some reasons you need to change, I think it's fine. But it's fine to bump a version. But like AMP image, probably unlikely. I mean, we were able to preserve all APIs. Yeah. Without changes there.
So do you envision that a company that's currently using AMP image 0.1 or 0.1 might be able to use version 1 with limited refactoring work, or would it be a major? I mean, obviously it's a major version.
Well, no. From the perspective of the consumer, it shouldn't really change. You'll still just use the AMP image element in your HTML page, and everything will work just like it did before.
Awesome.
So it may just be if it's a really complicated redesign, we may just bump may have to change the script URL that you're pointing to, But for something simple like AMP image, we can just support it without any changes.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's a bullet. Did you cut it? Oh, it's time.
More questions? The APIs, like the Preact or React APIs that these components are going to be using, will they be shared in like v0.js that each of the components then can reuse, or how will the virtual DOM diffing and all that stuff, will that be copied into each component in a Bento context, or?
I think for now, yes, Preact is small enough. I mean, in theory, we could have some bundling that's a little bit more creative. But for now, what we've seen is pretty straightforward.
So for instance, the AMP image, the component itself won't need it. We'll just publish that as a Preact component that you can consume. And when you're using it on an AMP page, we may host this in the framework itself, so we don't have to share the data. But if you're using this in Bento mode, like we could have a standalone Bento JavaScript file a standalone AMP image JavaScript file that you could just use without any issue. Or we could link to, if you're using AMP image and AMP carousel together, we could have a shared runtime that provides Preact for us so that we could not bundle it into each individual JavaScript file.
Okay, thanks. So, I may ask a question? I can't see. So just to clarify from my own point of view, so it sounds like, just to make sure I got it straight, you've got the AMP. I'm holding it up here.
Yep.
Oh, more like this. You got to lick them, do you? So you've got the Bento, when you're talking about the Bento components, there'll be the old AMP markup with the AMP hyphen syntax as before, and there will also be a Preact component which is separate.
It's more about layers. Like the new, the always existing AMP-image is just mapped to AMP image React component. And we're just allowing you to use any part of that chain. You can just use AMP image in React, or AMP carousel, or AMP YouTube player, or you can just, in AMP, obviously you just use AMP-YouTube. There is a fairly natural and pretty clear mapping between them. It's just they're more kind of a nested rather than alternative to each other.
Yeah. So in AMP mode, you just use AMP image as the HTML, the custom element that you always have. In Bento mode, you can also use the AMP image as a custom element. And in React mode, you just use the AMP image component and not the custom element that wraps it. In the back, there's one too.
Oh,
Esther, yeah.
while the mic goes there. How about Did you have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Then ask me.
Oh, okay. Hey. What is a good example or a common use case of Bento mode being used in the wild?
Well, now that we arrived at Preact, we are kind of looking exactly where these layers could be used. But I mean, I think there is still a healthy amount of applications that just want to use JavaScript. And just easiest for them to say, create element, carousel, create element, slide 1, 2, 3, whatever, just append child and be done with it. There is all kind of frameworks that don't work like React or Preact. For them, wrapping separately React and Preact, maybe not convenient. One of them is actually Angular. And I think we don't know yet where Angular is going to end up on a range of frameworks. So it could be easily that it's still going to be comfortable to use web component on a page.
So another use case for Bento mode could also be, for example, making code share across an AMP and the AMP part of the website and a non-AMP part of the website much easier. You could use AMP carousel and AMP sidebar or like some form of header, and that could be your shim. And then you could change out the content to be non-AMP or AMP, but you're still using your same AMP components across your AMP and non-AMP experience.
And it's still a valid AMP page?
It's still valid Bento AMP. So the the fully AMP page is a valid AMP page. The other one is not. It's a Bento AMP page.
Yeah, but which changed a little bit what valid means, right? Before, valid means it was the only place we could guarantee that components work correctly, really. Now we're just saying they always work correctly. It's just that if you use them safely without other components breaking layout or whatever, then it's obviously AMP valid page.
Actually, my question is partially resolved from previous question. My concern is about browser compatibility, especially those old browsers that enterprise or commercial side still needs to support, like IE9, IE10, IE11. Does the rewrite and bento work resolved it beautifully?
Well, I think it's only Shadow DOM, right? That's the problem. And I think because we control how we use Shadow DOM, there's all kind of features, but we limit them to a point that we know that polyfills actually work in those worlds. And obviously, what you mentioned right now are the only browsers left, right? At this point, Shadow DOM is available in a very good shape in Firefox and Safari and Chrome, some of them for years. Way beyond our normal support cycle. It's really that IE, falls in a crack here, and soon potentially Edgem will take care of it as well. But for now, yes, Shadow DOM has to be polyfilled with some minimal scope.
Shadow DOM, the custom elements, we have a polyfill for that. I believe it works in everything from IE10 or IE10 plus. I'm not sure what the Shadow DOM polyfill, what support it has, but we plan to support the same things that AMP does.
We try it as well. I try Shadow DOM, and it's doable as long as you keep the scope down to not use any extravagant features. And here it's our components. We decide just reduce different obscure cases.
Does that mean that it will bring suboptimal experience to the users who requires
it still works pretty well. I mean, the biggest difference would be something like if you have carousel and you want to use direct child CSS, that's broken. For instance, you want to say I'm carousel slide and child 1 or and child 0 because you want first slide to look different with different backgrounds. Say, obviously that's not polyfillable at all. That's something we just have to publish. But very importantly, and I think one of the slides showed it pretty well, in React world, actually, it's completely invisible. There is no Shadow DOM there. It's just a normal React component, and it works anywhere where React or Preact will work. So it's really only in an AMP world, specifically, where we might have that issue. And we have a number of tools to deal with it because we control the framework. So we could have like page level kind of polyfills that optimize those things away.
Okay, thanks.
And by the way, right now, it's not something you can do it either.